I need to tell you something most people will never hear in a routine checkup. After the age of 50, your body enters a quiet, invisible battle, and the truth is, most people are losing without realizing it. This isn't about the fat you can see in the mirror. It's not about the extra inches you can pinch around your waist. What I'm talking about is far more dangerous and far more deceptive. Deep inside your abdomen, there's a type of fat that doesn't just sit there. It wraps itself around your internal organs, your liver, your pancreas, your kidneys, even your heart. And instead of staying passive, it actively damages them. Slowly, silently, every single day. This is called visceral fat. And it is without exaggeration one of the most dangerous things your body can accumulate. Here's a number that should make you stop and think. People with high levels of visceral fat have up to a 40% higher risk of dying from major diseases, heart disease, cancer, and even cognitive decline compared to those with low levels. Not 10%, not 20%, 40%. That means the fat you can't see is far more dangerous than the fat you can. And what makes this even more concerning is something I've seen again and again. People who genuinely care about their health. People who are trying to eat better, move more, and make the right choices. Yet their visceral fat keeps increasing. Their inflammation rises. Their energy drops. Their body feels like it's working against them. It's frustrating, confusing, and for many, deeply discouraging. But here's the truth most people never get told. This is not random. There are specific biological reasons why this happens after 50, and once you understand them, everything begins to make sense. Around this stage of life, your body undergoes 3 major shifts, each one quietly pushing your system toward fat storage and inflammation. First, your hormones change. In women, estrogen levels begin to drop during perimenopause and menopause. This matters because estrogen helps direct fat storage away from the abdomen. When it declines, fat begins to shift toward the belly, specifically into visceral stores. In men, testosterone gradually declines over time. By the time you reach your 50s, this drop becomes significant, and lower testosterone levels are strongly linked to increased abdominal fat. Second, your metabolism slows down. Every decade after 30, your resting metabolic rate decreases by about 2 to 3%. That may sound small, but over time it adds up. The same meal your body once burned efficiently now gets stored more easily as fat. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because your biology has changed. Third, and this is the one almost nobody talks about, your gut begins to change. Your gut microbiome, which plays a massive role in metabolism and inflammation, becomes less diverse with age. And this loss of diversity allows harmful compounds to leak into your bloodstream, triggering chronic, low-grade inflammation throughout your body. That inflammation interferes with insulin sensitivity, which increases fat storage, which creates more inflammation. And just like that, your body enters a cycle, a loop that feeds itself. But here's the most important thing you need to understand. This cycle is not permanent. It can be interrupted. And not with extreme diets, complicated routines, or expensive treatments, but with something far more powerful and far more accessible. Specific foods. There are 6 in particular that have been studied extensively. Foods that don't just support general health, but actively target the mechanisms driving visceral fat and inflammation. Some of these foods work by calming inflammation at its root. Others improve hormonal balance. Some repair your gut environment. And a few actually signal your fat cells to release stored energy. This is not theory. These are measurable biological effects. And when used consistently, they can begin to shift your body out of that destructive cycle and back toward balance. Now, before we go into the first food, there's one thing I want you to do. If you've been watching content like this, learning, trying to improve your health, but haven't taken that small step to stay connected, pause for just a second and make sure you're subscribed. Because information like this only helps if it reaches you consistently. Before you dismiss this next food as something you already know, I want you to pause, because what I'm about to show you will completely change how you see it. The first food that directly targets visceral fat is something many people already have in their kitchen, but very few are actually using it correctly. Extra virgin olive oil. But not just any olive oil. Not the cheap bottle that's been sitting under bright supermarket lights for months. Not the light version. Not the overly processed blends. What I'm talking about is real, high-quality, cold-pressed extra virgin olive oil. Because when it's authentic and properly stored, it contains a compound that is nothing short of extraordinary. A natural molecule called oleocanthal. Oleocanthal works inside your body in a way that is almost identical to a common painkiller. It targets the same inflammatory pathways, the COX-1 and COX-2 enzymes that medications are designed to block. But here's the difference. It does this without damaging your gut lining, without increasing cardiovascular risk, and without the long-term side effects associated with regular use of synthetic drugs. Every time you consume high-quality extra virgin olive oil, you are delivering a powerful anti-inflammatory signal to your body. And inflammation, as you now understand, is one of the core drivers of visceral fat accumulation. But that's only the beginning. In large-scale, long-term research involving thousands of individuals, those who regularly consumed extra virgin olive oil showed greater reductions in abdominal fat compared to those following low-fat diets, even when their total calorie intake was nearly identical. Think about that for a moment. Same calories, different outcome. That means this isn't just about how much you eat. It's about what your food is doing inside your body. Olive oil is rich in a monounsaturated fat called oleic acid. And this fat has a unique ability. It activates a specific pathway inside your cells that essentially tells your body to switch into fat-burning mode. More specifically, it signals your body to use stored fat, especially around the abdomen, as a source of energy. Not later, not theoretically, but actively, as part of your metabolism. Now here's where most people get it wrong. They assume all olive oil works the same way. It doesn't. The beneficial compounds, especially oleocanthal, are extremely sensitive. Exposure to heat, light, and time can degrade them significantly, which means if you're using low-quality oil, you may be missing most of the benefit. So what should you look for? Dark glass bottles, a recent harvest date, cold-pressed labeling, and ideally, a slightly peppery taste. That subtle burn at the back of your throat is actually a sign of higher oleocanthal content. That sensation, that's the compound working. Now let's talk about how to use it. The effective range, based on research, is about 2 to 4 tablespoons per day. But here's the key. It's not about cooking everything in it at high heat. Excessive heat can destroy many of its active compounds. Instead, use it where it matters most. Drizzle it over salads. Add it to cooked vegetables after they've been prepared. Use it to finish soups. Mix it into dressings. Let it remain as intact as possible. Because when used correctly, this single food becomes one of the most powerful daily tools you have against inflammation and visceral fat. Now, here's where things get even more interesting. Because the next food doesn't just reduce inflammation, it actually changes the behavior of your fat cells themselves. It turns them from something harmful into something your body can begin to reverse. What if I told you that the fat inside your body isn't just sitting there, but actively working against you? Not quietly, not passively, but constantly releasing signals that keep your body inflamed, tired, and stuck in fat storage mode. Because that's exactly what visceral fat does. It behaves less like stored energy and more like an organ. An organ that produces inflammatory compounds that travel through your bloodstream and affect nearly every system in your body. Your heart, your brain, your joints, even your metabolism itself. And if that sounds alarming, it should. But here's the part that changes everything. There is a specific type of food that can directly interrupt this process at the cellular level. Not by masking symptoms, but by actually changing what your fat cells are doing. That food is fatty fish. And I'm talking about options like wild salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring, and anchovies. Now, most people already know these foods are healthy, but very few understand why they are so powerful, especially after the age of 50. Inside these fish are 2 critical compounds, EPA and DHA. These are omega-3 fatty acids, but not just any fats. They are structural fats, meaning they don't just float around in your bloodstream, they actually become part of your cells. When you regularly consume fatty fish, EPA and DHA are incorporated directly into the membranes of your fat cells, your immune cells, and even the cells lining your arteries. And once they're there, something remarkable happens. They begin to replace the types of fats that promote inflammation. Think of it like swapping out the building materials of your body. Where there were once compounds triggering inflammatory signals, Now there are compounds that actively calm and resolve that inflammation. In fact, your body uses omega-3s to create molecules called resolvins and protectins. And these aren't just helpful, they are essential. Because their job is to tell your immune system the threat is over. Stand down. Stop the inflammation. That's something most people don't realize. Inflammation isn't just about turning on, it's about turning off. And many bodies, especially after 50, lose that ability. Omega-3s help restore it. But that's just one mechanism. There's another effect that makes fatty fish even more powerful for reducing visceral fat. In controlled clinical trials, increasing omega-3 intake has been shown to reduce abdominal fat area measured using advanced imaging techniques. And interestingly, the effect appears to be even stronger in older adults, which means your body may actually become more responsive to these nutrients as you age. Now here's where it gets even more fascinating. Your body has different types of fat. White fat, the kind most people are familiar with, stores energy. But brown fat behaves differently. Brown fat burns energy. It generates heat. It's metabolically active in a beneficial way. And under the right conditions, your body can begin to convert some white fat into a more active, brown-like state. This process is often referred to as fat browning. And omega-3 fatty acids have been shown to support this shift, particularly in abdominal fat tissue. In simple terms, they help turn harmful fat into something your body can actually use. Now, there's an important detail here that many people overlook. Supplements are not the same as whole food. While fish oil capsules can provide some benefit, they often lack the full spectrum of compounds found in real fish. Fatty fish contains additional nutrients that work together. Powerful antioxidants, mitochondrial support compounds, trace minerals, all contributing to a broader effect that isolated supplements simply can't replicate. This is why people who rely only on capsules often don't see the same results. The form matters. The combination matters. The context matters. So what should you actually do? Aim for 3 to 4 servings of fatty fish per week. That's it. It doesn't have to be complicated. A simple piece of baked salmon with herbs and olive oil. A quick meal of sardines with whole grain bread and avocado. Even canned options can be incredibly effective as long as they're high quality. And here's something worth remembering. Smaller fish like sardines and anchovies tend to have lower levels of contaminants compared to larger fish, which makes them not only affordable, but also one of the safest and most efficient options available. Now take a step back and think about what you've learned so far. You have one food that directly reduces inflammation and activates fat-burning pathways, and another that actually rewires your fat cells, calming inflammation and shifting your metabolism. But what if I told you the next food works on something even deeper? Not just your fat cells, not just your metabolism, but the control center that decides whether your body stores fat or burns it. What if the reason your body feels like it's holding on to fat has nothing to do with how hard you're trying? What if the real problem isn't effort, but a hidden signal inside your body that keeps telling it to store instead of burn? Because that's exactly what happens for millions of people after 50. And the signal I'm talking about is inflammation specifically, the kind that operates quietly in the background, influencing everything from your metabolism to your appetite, your energy, and even how your body responds to food. Now here's where things get interesting. There is a simple, everyday food that has been shown to directly interrupt this inflammatory signal at one of the highest control points in your body. Not gradually, not indirectly, but right at the source. That food is blueberries. And before you think of them as just another fruit, understand this. Blueberries are one of the most concentrated sources of powerful plant compounds ever studied for metabolic health. These compounds are called anthocyanins. They're the pigments responsible for that deep blue and purple color, but their role goes far beyond appearance. Inside your body, anthocyanins interact with a master switch that controls inflammation. This switch is often referred to as NFKB. Think of it as the command center for your body's inflammatory response. When it's activated too frequently, which is common in people with high visceral fat, it sends out constant signals that keep inflammation turned on. And as you now know, chronic inflammation leads to insulin resistance, which leads to more fat storage, which leads to even more inflammation. A loop. A cycle. Anthocyanins help break that cycle. They reduce the overactivation of this inflammatory pathway, essentially calming the system down and bringing your body back toward balance. And when that happens, something remarkable follows. Your cells become more responsive to insulin. Your body becomes more efficient at using energy. And your tendency to store fat, especially in the abdominal region, begins to decrease. But that's only one layer of what blueberries do. There's another compound found in them, one that has been gaining increasing attention in metabolic research. It's closely related to resveratrol, and it plays a role in activating a key energy-regulating pathway inside your cells. This pathway acts like a metabolic switch. When it's turned on, your body shifts away from storing energy and moves toward burning it. And this effect appears to be particularly noticeable in older adults. Now, you might be wondering, does something this simple really make a measurable difference? The answer is yes. In controlled human studies, individuals who added a daily serving of blueberries without making any other major dietary changes showed improvements in insulin sensitivity, reductions in inflammatory markers, and decreases in abdominal fat over time. No extreme dieting. No drastic lifestyle overhaul. Just one consistent addition. And here's something even more practical. Frozen blueberries are just as effective, sometimes even more so than fresh ones, because they're typically preserved at peak ripeness, which helps retain their nutrient content. So accessibility is not an issue. You don't need anything expensive or complicated. 1 cup per day. That's it. You can eat them on their own, add them to yogurt, blend them into a smoothie, or include them as part of your breakfast routine. Simple, consist, effective. Now pause for a moment and look at what you've built so far. You have foods that reduce inflammation directly. Foods that change how your fat cells behave. Foods that improve insulin sensitivity and metabolic balance. Each one targeting a different part of the same problem. But the next food takes this even further, because it doesn't just calm inflammation. It blocks it at the root. It interferes with the very mechanism that turns inflammation on in the first place. And without one small addition, it barely works at all. What if one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory compounds in the world has been sitting in your kitchen this entire time, yet your body has barely been using it? Not because it doesn't work, but because almost everyone uses it incorrectly. This is where we talk about turmeric. And more importantly, why turmeric alone is not enough. Because here's the truth most people never hear. You can add turmeric to your meals every single day and still get almost no real benefit from it. That's not an exaggeration. It comes down to one critical factor: absorption. The primary active compound in turmeric is called curcumin, and when scientists study it in controlled environments, the list of its effects is extraordinary. It supports metabolic health. It reduces inflammation. It interacts with pathways linked to fat storage, insulin sensitivity, and even cellular aging. On paper, it looks like one of the most powerful natural compounds we've ever studied. But here's the problem. When you consume turmeric by itself, your body absorbs less than 1% of that curcumin. Less than 1%. Which means almost all of it passes through your system without ever reaching your bloodstream in meaningful amounts. And that's exactly why so many people try turmeric and feel nothing. Not because it doesn't work, but because their body never actually gets access to it. Now this is where everything changes. There's a simple, almost effortless way to transform turmeric from something nearly inactive into something biologically powerful. And that's by combining it with black pepper. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine. And when piperine is present, it blocks the process in your liver that rapidly breaks down curcumin before it can circulate in your body. At the same time, it enhances absorption in your digestive tract. The result? Curcumin absorption increases by up to 0%. Not 20%. Not double. 2,000%. That one small addition completely changes everything. Now, instead of passing through your system, curcumin enters your bloodstream, reaches your tissues, and begins interacting with the exact pathways that control inflammation and fat storage. One of those pathways is the same inflammatory control center we talked about earlier. But curcumin doesn't just calm it down. It acts even earlier in the process. It interferes with the signal that activates inflammation in the first place. Think of it this way. If inflammation is like a fire alarm constantly going off inside your body, other compounds may help lower the volume. Curcumin helps cut the wire. It reduces the trigger itself. And this matters especially when it comes to visceral fat. Because that internal fat is not just influenced by calories, it's influenced by inflammatory signals telling your body to store and maintain it. By reducing those signals at the source, curcumin helps shift your body away from fat storage and toward fat utilization. But there's more. Curcumin also affects the formation of new fat cells. Your body is constantly deciding whether to create and fill new fat cells, especially in the abdominal region. Curcumin has been shown to interfere with the genetic pathways that drive this process, which means it doesn't just help reduce existing fat, it helps prevent new fat from accumulating. That's a completely different level of impact. Now let's talk about how to actually use this in real life. Because this is where consistency matters more than perfection. A practical daily approach is simple. 1 to 2 teaspoons of turmeric, a generous pinch of black pepper, and ideally, a source of healthy fat. Because curcumin is fat-soluble, meaning it absorbs better when consumed with fat. This is where everything begins to connect. When you combine turmeric with black pepper and pair it with something like olive oil or avocado, you create a powerful synergy, each component enhancing the effect of the others. You can add it to warm milk or plant-based milk to make a simple drink. Mix it into soups. Stir it into eggs. Blend it into a smoothie. It doesn't need to be complicated. It just needs to be consistent. Now step back for a moment. Look at what you've built so far. You have foods that reduce inflammation, foods that change how your fat cells behave, foods that improve metabolic signaling, and now, a compound that helps shut down inflammation at its source, while also preventing new fat from forming. But there's still one missing piece. Because even if you control inflammation, even if you improve metabolism, your body still responds to something deeper. Something that silently drives fat storage, especially around the abdomen. A signal tied to stress, to hormones, to your internal balance. And the next food directly targets that signal in a way most people have never even considered. This is where everything comes together. What if I told you that one of the biggest drivers of belly fat after 50 isn't just what you eat, but how your body responds to stress? Because even if your diet is perfect, even if you're doing everything right, there's one hormone that can quietly override it all. Cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone. Now, cortisol is not the enemy. In the right amounts, at the right times, it's essential. It helps you wake up, stay alert, and respond to challenges. But when cortisol stays elevated for too long, which is incredibly common after 50 due to poor sleep, chronic stress, and nutrient deficiencies, it begins to send a very specific message to your body. Store fat. And not just anywhere. Specifically in the abdominal region. This is not random. It's a survival mechanism. Your body is trying to protect you by storing energy close to vital organs. But in modern life, that signal never turns off. And that's where the next food becomes critical. Leafy greens. Not just because they're healthy, not just because they contain vitamins, but because they directly influence the systems that regulate cortisol, appetite, and fat storage. Inside leafy greens, spinach, kale, arugula, Swiss chard, there are compounds that most people have never heard of, yet they have powerful effects inside your body. One of those is related to how your body digests fat. When you eat leafy greens, they slow down the digestion process in your small intestine. This isn't a bad thing, it's exactly what your body needs. Because slower digestion triggers the release of hormones that tell your brain, you're full. You don't need more food. These satiety signals last longer, which means fewer cravings, less snacking, and naturally lower calorie intake without willpower. But that's only part of the story. The deeper impact comes from a mineral that leafy greens provide in abundance. Magnesium. And here's something most people don't realize. A large percentage of adults over 50 are deficient in magnesium, and that deficiency directly affects cortisol. When magnesium levels are low, your body struggles to regulate stress hormones properly. Cortisol spikes become stronger and last longer, which means your body stays in fat storage mode, especially around the abdomen. But when you restore magnesium through foods like leafy greens, something shifts. Cortisol becomes more controlled. Your body feels less on edge, and that constant signal to store fat begins to fade. This is one of the most overlooked connections in metabolic health. It's not just about calories, it's about signals. Now add to this another benefit. Leafy greens are also rich in vitamin K, particularly in a form that your body can convert and use for multiple functions. Research has shown that higher intake of this vitamin is associated with lower levels of visceral fat, not through extreme mechanisms, but through steady, consistent metabolic support. So what does this look like in real life? It's simpler than you think. 3 to 4 cups of leafy greens per day. That might sound like a lot, but once you start incorporating them into meals, it becomes easy. A large salad. Sautéed greens with garlic and olive oil. Blended into a smoothie. Consistency matters more than variety. Now here's where everything comes together. Because the final food on this list doesn't just work on its own. It amplifies everything else. Avocado. This is one of the most misunderstood foods when it comes to fat loss. People still hesitate because of the calories, because of the fat content. But the research tells a completely different story. When people include avocado regularly in their diet, something surprising happens. Their abdominal fat decreases, not increases, and the distribution of fat in their body improves. Less around the organs, more in safer storage areas. Why? Because avocado is rich in the same type of fat found in olive oil oleic acid, which activates fat-burning pathways in your body. But it also contains fiber, a significant amount. Fiber that feeds beneficial gut bacteria, which improves gut health, which reduces inflammation, which improves insulin sensitivity. Everything connects. And then there's something even more powerful. Avocado enhances the absorption of nutrients from other foods. When you eat it alongside leafy greens, turmeric, or even vegetables, it increases the amount of beneficial compounds your body actually absorbs. In some cases, dramatically. Which means it doesn't just work alone. It makes everything else work better. That's why the combination matters. Now imagine this as a simple daily rhythm. In the morning, blueberries and turmeric with black pepper. During the day, a large salad with leafy greens, olive oil, and avocado. And a few times a week, fatty fish as your protein source. No extremes. No complicated rules. Just consistent, strategic choices. And here's the truth I want you to leave with. Your body is not broken. It's responding to signals. And when you change those signals, your body responds. It always has. It always will. The ability to reduce inflammation, to shift metabolism, to lose visceral fat, that machinery is still inside you right now, waiting. Not for perfection, but for the right inputs. You now have them. 6 foods. Used consistently. Used intentionally. This is not a temporary fix. It's a new direction. And if this opened your eyes even a little, if it gave you clarity where there was confusion, then take one small step right now. Like the video so more people can see it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And share this with someone who needs it, because you never know whose life it might change. Start today. Your body is ready. Now it's your move.